Welcome to Betrayal and Revenge. I'm your storyteller, and today I'll take you on a journey of secrets, lies, and payback. Make sure you stay with me until the very end. You won't want to miss how it all unfolds. And when it's over, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop a comment below and let me know what you think. They called me the old lady who's paying for everything. Not to my face, of course, at least not before that day. But I saw it in their eyes. In the way they waved me off during planning meetings, in how no one ever returned my calls when I asked about seating arrangements or catering details. I was just the wallet, the relic, the necessary nuisance they had to invite because I was funding the show. And at my granddaughter's wedding, my own blood, I was finally handed the proof. It was a gorgeous June afternoon, the kind people spend months obsessing over. Skies brushed with soft blues and blush clouds, sunlight filtering like honey through rows of perfectly trimmed magnolias. The venue was a country estate just outside Charleston, draped in white peonies and twinkle lights, the kind of place that costs more for one night than I paid for my first home. I had written the checks for it all, quietly, without demand or condition, because I loved her, because I believed in family. Marissa, my only granddaughter, had always been a radiant child. Curious, sharp, with a laugh that could peel the bark off trees. I used to babysit her while her mother, my daughter-in-law, networked at charity events. I taught her how to bake scones, to thread a needle, to look people in the eye when they spoke. When she was 10 and sobbing over her parents' looming divorce, it was my lap she buried her face in. And when her father, my son, remarried a woman barely 10 years older than Marissa herself, it was me who reassured her she still belonged somewhere. So when the wedding plans began and Marissa and her fiancé had nothing but dreams and Pinterest boards, it felt natural to offer help. I didn't frame it as charity or control. Just love. Tell me what you need, I said. I'd like to give you the day you've dreamed of. First, she was grateful, teary-eyed even. We sipped tea at my kitchen table, talking about dresses and music and cake flavors. I showed her my wedding photo, all sepia and soft curls, and she laughed at the veil but held the picture like it meant something. And I felt close to her again, like I mattered. But then something shifted. Started with emails I wasn't copied on. Decisions made before bothering Grandma. Her mother, my ex-daughter-in-law, took over the coordination. She'd remarried well, found herself a man who worked in finance and wore smugness like cufflinks. Together they decided my taste was a bit too traditional. I was invited to one floral meeting where I was outvoted by a 26-year-old wedding aesthetic consultant with a tablet full of Instagram mood boards. When I suggested an old family hymn be played during the ceremony, Marissa smiled with her mouth but not her eyes. We want something more modern, Gran. I nodded, bit my tongue, told myself this wasn't about me. But the signs piled up. The day I offered to host a small pre-wedding brunch at my home, her mother replied, "We've already booked something trendier downtown. But thank you." When I bought vintage sapphire earrings for Marissa to wear, something blue, something borrowed, she thanked me sweetly and then posted a selfie wearing minimalist diamond studs, from Dylan's side of the family. I was no longer part of the narrative. I was a footnote. Still I showed up. I wore the powder blue suit Marissa had once said brought out my eyes. I had my hair done professionally for the first time in years. I arrived early, holding a gift wrapped in silver paper and tied with a ribbon. The usher, a boy in suspenders chewing gum, glanced at the card and guided me toward the outer edge of the reception lawn. It struck me as odd. I assumed I'd be seated closer to the family table. But I kept walking. Until I saw it. A long white table covered in pastel name cards.
Iskanet for mina.
And there it was. The old lady who's paying for everything. Typed. Not handwritten. Not a joke scribbled by a mischievous child. A printed, laminated, deliberate name card, placed beside a plate of salmon mousse and a napkin folded like a swan. For a moment I truly believed it was a mistake. Some crude placeholder forgotten in the rush. But then I noticed the smirk from Dylan's cousin, the tight smile of Marissa's mother across the lawn. No one looked surprised. They'd seen it. Maybe even approved it. I didn't sit down. I turned and walked calmly, quietly toward the parking area.
No tears.
Not yet. Just a cold, clean clarity blooming in my chest like frost spreading across glass. I slipped into the back seat of my hired car and whispered one word to the driver. Home. As the trees blurred past the windows, I felt something inside me crystallize. They thought I was weak. That I'd keep giving. That I'd keep showing up with checkbooks and soft smiles, desperate for inclusion. But they had just made a mistake. A big one. 'Cause I may be old, but I'm not irrelevant. And I don't forget. In the days following the wedding, the world went on as if nothing had happened. The florist posted glossy pictures of cascading centerpieces on Instagram. The venue shared drone footage of laughing guests in linen suits and pastel dresses, clinking glasses under fairy lights. And Marissa uploaded a carousel of wedding photos with the caption, "A perfect day with perfect people, 2 hearts #blessed." I wasn't in a single frame. I scrolled through them one by one, my hand steady on the mouse, my face reflected in the dark edge of the screen. There had been a time, too many years ago, when I might have cried, might have called and asked why, might have tried to explain how I felt. But not now. Not anymore. Grief, I'd learned, doesn't always show up as tears. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's a spreadsheet of expenses labeled gift, paid for by someone never thanked. Because yes, I had paid for everything. The venue deposit, the catering, the dress fittings, the photographer flown in from New York, even the custom labels on their party favors. Rose-scented candles printed with MND forever. They burned down to nothing in a night. Like the last of my illusions. Still I said nothing. Not to Marissa. Not to my son. Not even to my sister Lorraine when she called and asked, "Did I see what I think I saw on that name card?" I only replied, "Yes, darling. You saw it." And then I changed the subject. But silence does not mean peace. Inside me, something had begun to turn, slow grinding, like tectonic plates shifting under years of polite endurance. I had spent most of my life believing that generosity, done right, should be invisible. That helping others should come without expectation of gratitude or recognition. But there's a difference between humility and erasure. And I had just realized how easily people you love will choose the latter, if it suits them. It wasn't just about the card. It was about a lifetime of tiny degradations that had gone unnoticed, or worse, unchallenged. Like when my son Mark started bringing his new wife to Christmas, and I was suddenly Maureen instead of Mom. Like the way they always forgot to call me on my birthday unless I sent a reminder email. Like the times Marissa needed money for university, texting me like a friend with little hearts and thank yous, until the checks cleared and the silence returned. I wasn't family to them. I was a utility. A soft bank in orthopedic shoes. And I had let it happen. I thought of all the times I sat at the edges of their joy, baby showers, engagement parties, holiday dinners. Always smiling, always helping. Never asked to speak or toast. Just there. I remembered offering to babysit so they could go on vacations, paying for braces when insurance wouldn't cover it, covering tuition gaps when Marissa's loan fell through. I had given. And given. And given. And now? Now I was the old lady who's paying for everything. The part that stung most wasn't even the insult. It was the laughter. I could hear it in my head, how it must have gone when they printed that tag. Oh, she won't even notice. She can barely read her iPad without her glasses. Or worse, she'll probably think it's funny, as if humiliation were comedy. But what they hadn't counted on, what none of them had ever really understood, was that I had a mind like a ledger book and a memory like granite. And while I may not have said a word that night, I went home and opened my files. Not just emotional ones, literal ones. Receipts, transfers, deeds. Because when people show you exactly what you mean to them, it's time to start recalculating the cost. The drawer in my study where I kept the financial documents had not been touched in months, maybe longer. It was lined with old lace, yellowed at the corners, and smelled faintly of cedar and ink. I opened it that evening, not in anger but in ritual, because I needed to see it. All of it. The proof that their so-called independence was a fairy tale propped up by my quiet stability. That every shimmering thread in the tapestry of their lives had been stitched by my hand. Folder by folder I pulled out paper. Receipts. Contracts.
Wire confirmations.
Promissory notes with no due dates, because I had never asked for repayment. Bank transfers labeled gift, family, or simply urgent. Over $320,000 in the last decade alone, sent without ceremony, without expectations, just love, or at least what I thought love should look like. The house Marissa had lived in during college? I'd paid the lease for 3 years straight. When her car broke down on the interstate during grad school, it was my savings that bought the new Honda, registered in her name. The honeymoon suite she'd posted so many Instagram stories from. Champagne glasses, silk robes, ocean views, that too had been billed to my account. All without so much as a thank you card. I ran my fingers across a check copy from 3 years ago. $12,000 to cover unexpected venue fees for Marissa's mother's gala. I remembered how her voice had sounded on the phone then. Thin with stress, soft with false warmth. Only if you can swing it, Maureen. You know how important this is to her. I had written the check that same day. And now? Now I was the punchline. I leaned back in the armchair, folder open in my lap, and stared out the window into the soft dusk of my garden. A hummingbird dipped toward the lavender, wings ablur. My roses were blooming again, despite being cut back harshly last fall. I thought about how even flowers can be pruned and still return stronger, wiser. I pulled out a fresh notepad and began writing. Not a letter, not a complaint, not a plea. A list. Assets. Accounts. Property lines. Inheritance clauses. Because if they truly saw me as the old lady who's paying for everything, I would make sure they understood what that meant. That they had, until now, lived in a world carefully cushioned by my hands. And those hands could be withdrawn. I wasn't vindictive by nature. But I was precise. And I had learned from the best, the same family that smiled while erasing me. I contacted my attorney the next morning. She was younger, sharp-eyed, and had once helped me settle a neighbor's disputed boundary claim with such ferocity that I had kept her number pinned to my fridge ever since. When I explained what I wanted, she didn't flinch. You want to change the estate plan entirely? Yes, I said. Every word. And the trust for your granddaughter? I hesitated only a moment. She's made it clear how she sees me. I'll make sure that image comes with a price. The new plan was simple. The trust accounts would be dissolved. Instead, charitable endowments would be established in my name. One for education funding for single mothers, another for elderly housing projects. My home, once promised to my son in vague conversations over holidays, would now be left to a foundation that preserved historical homes and opened them to the public. Every asset I had ever labeled for family would be redefined. My lawyer smiled. Do you want to notify them now? Not yet, I said. They don't know there's a reckoning coming. But I would give them one. Not a dramatic reading. Not a scathing email. Something subtler. More elegant. A slow disassembly of the web they never realized I wove beneath them. And when it came undone, they would feel it. Not as rage, but as absence. As silence. As doors that no longer opened. Later that week, a glossy thank you card arrived in the mail. From Marissa. Grand. Thank you so much for everything. The day was unforgettable. You were so generous, and everyone adored having you there. No mention of the name card.
No επάλεγει. No explanation.
Just a platitude mailed 5 days too late, likely prompted by guilt or more likely by appearances. I placed it on the mantel next to the file folders, a monument to their final assumption, that I'd keep paying, smiling, forgiving. But they were wrong. The old lady was done. The first tremor passed through the family unnoticed. It came as a polite email from the venue's billing department, sent to Marissa's husband, Dylan, 2 weeks after the wedding. A friendly reminder, they called it, that the final payment on the exclusive service package, a hefty sum for additional staff, overtime and late-night champagne deliveries, had not yet been processed. They assumed the original cardholder had meant to finalize it. But the card was no longer valid. Dylan forwarded the email to Marissa. Marissa forwarded it to her mother. Her mother forwarded it to me. Maureen dear, she wrote. Looks like there was a little hiccup. Can you kindly take care of this like you did the rest? I didn't respond. 3 days later I received another email, this time from the florist. Apparently, 2 centerpieces had been taken home by guests and charged as missing inventory. The bill was modest, under $1,000. But still addressed to me. I deleted it. The call started next. First from Marissa. Breezy sweet, lined with practice charm.
Y gran.
Just wondering if the check for the photographer's travel fees got lost in the mail? They haven't received anything yet. Hope you're doing well. Love you. I didn't answer. Then from Mark, my son. His voice at first was light, reassuring. Hey Mom. I think there's been some confusion with the wedding bills. I know you said you'd handle everything, so just let me know if you need help sorting it out. I didn't call back. They waited. A week. Then another. By the third week the tone shifted. Marissa sent a text, short and clipped. I don't understand what's going on. You promised. Her mother called, then left a voicemail, thick with disbelief. I hope this isn't some kind of reaction to the name card thing. It was a joke, Maureen. A light-hearted thing. We all laughed. I listened to that voicemail exactly once. Then I saved it, labeled it memory, and placed my phone screen down. Meanwhile, the lawyer and I worked in silence. The estate plan was finalized and signed. My assets, home, savings, stocks, were now redirected to charitable foundations and legacy trusts that bypass my family entirely. I instructed my financial advisor to lock down all automatic transfers to Marissa's education savings account, which I had discovered had been used recently for luxury handbags and Airbnb rentals in Tuscany. A polite audit report was sent to me. I read it with a glass of tea in hand, no longer surprised. Then came the house visit. Mark appeared unannounced on a Friday afternoon, stepping through my garden gate with the careful optimism of a son who expected warm tea and soft forgiveness. He found me pruning roses, gloves on, clippers in hand. His face was drawn, not angry but confused, tired, unsettled in a way he wasn't used to feeling. Mom, he said, we need to talk. I nodded toward the porch. Shoes off, please. I just cleaned. He blinked at me as if I'd spoken Latin, but he obeyed. Inside I made him tea, set the tray down between us. China cups, fresh lemon. The ritual of it seemed to center him, as if he could rewind the clock. But time once broken cannot be rewound, can only be confronted. We're all really confused, he began. The payments stopped. Marissa and Dylan are dealing with outstanding balances. It's embarrassing. I sipped my tea. I imagine it is. He frowned. You always said you wanted to help her. That she was your legacy. She was, I said calmly, until she made it clear I was an accessory. He sat back stunned. This is about a name card? No, I said. It's about a lifetime of being erased in slow motion. The card was just the title page. He didn't speak for a while. When he did, his voice was quieter. I think you're overreacting. And there it was, the dismissal, the refusal to see, the comfort they all had in believing that I was endlessly pliable, that I would bend and never snap. I don't need you to understand, I said, standing, only to respect it. He left not long after, his teacup barely touched. As he walked down the front steps, I called after him gently, kindly. Oh, Mark, one more thing. He turned. You might want to start saving for your own retirement. The trust has been closed. His face paled, but I had already turned back to the roses. The silence that followed was deafening. Days passed. Then a week. The messages stopped. The calls ceased. It was as if my absence, my financial absence, left them paralyzed like a ship discovering too late that its anchor had always been invisible. I didn't chase them. I didn't explain. I simply resumed my days. Mornings became slower, richer. I took long walks without checking my phone. I started volunteering at the historical library, dusting forgotten shelves and helping teenage girls research scholarships. Girls who said thank you without being prompted. I replanted my herb garden, baked blueberry muffins, began rereading all the novels I'd once loved and put aside until later. And while I rediscovered myself, the family began to unravel. It began quietly, as most fractures do. Whispers. Misunderstandings. One morning, while sipping my coffee, I opened the local community news site and saw a headline buried under the fold. Venue sues for non-payment after high-profile wedding. My breath didn't catch. My heart didn't flutter. I simply smiled and clicked the article. The lawsuit was minor, more symbolic than threatening. But it meant attention. It meant discomfort. It meant questions from the very social circles Marissa and her mother so desperately tried to impress. The glamorous it couple, who'd flaunted their perfect wedding, now had creditors knocking on their curated door. I received a voicemail that afternoon. It was Dylan.
I, Maureen.
I think there's been a miscommunication. Maybe we can talk? I'd love to clear the air. I didn't reply. 3 days later, an email arrived from a wedding vendor collective, listing unpaid balances under the groom's family name, meaning Dylan's, and a note requesting alternative contacts. I forwarded it to my lawyer. That was all. By then, word had reached the extended family. Cousin Julia called me just to check in. But after 3 minutes of vague niceties, she asked outright, "Did you really cut Marissa off completely?" I paused, sipped my tea, and replied simply, "No, Julia. I set her free." The shift was irreversible. Marissa herself finally reached out, not with flowers or a card or a long overdue apology, but with a brisk, pointed text. "I don't know what narrative you're creating here, but you promised to support my wedding. People are talking. Fix it."
No greeting.
No love. Just entitlement wrapped in blame. I stared at the message for a long moment. Then I replied with only 2 words. "I did." She never responded. It was around that time I noticed something else, something more fragile than lawsuits and balance sheets. I noticed they had begun erasing me in real time. Marissa's wedding photos were suddenly edited. New posts, new captions. Where once she had tagged me lovingly in early dress fittings, now she mentioned only her amazing bridal team. Family portraits were cropped. A post titled "Thankful for the incredible support behind our big day" listed half the wedding party by name, but not mine. And so I let them edit. I let them crop, rewrite, delete. Because what they didn't understand was that history doesn't belong to the loudest voice in the room. It belongs to the one who remembers. And I remembered everything. Every phone call. Every check. Every soft betrayal. Hidden in small smiles and social media filters. And still, part of me waited. I wasn't made of ice. There was a small corner of my heart, beaten, bruised, but not broken, that wondered if Marissa would show up one day, sit across from me with nothing rehearsed or clever, and just say, "I'm sorry." That maybe the girl I once cradled through divorce and heartbreak might return, if only briefly. That hope ended the day I received a glossy print invitation to a charity gala, an event Marissa's mother was co-hosting with Dylan's firm. It was a fundraiser for underprivileged families and at-risk youth, held in a ballroom I had personally helped renovate 15 years ago through a legacy donation. The invitation was addressed to Mrs. M. Lancaster. Lancaster, my ex-husband's surname, the one I hadn't used since the day he walked out 30 years ago. They didn't even remember my name. I stared at the gold lettering, the cursive calligraphy, the presumptuous RSVP link printed beneath it all like a slap. I held it over the fireplace for a moment, considering fire. But instead, I tucked it into the folder labeled Lessons. It was growing thick now, that folder. Not with rage, but with facts. With proof. With the kind of paper trail that could tear through a curated public image in under a week, if I ever chose to go that route. But I had something better. I had time. I had clarity. I had plans. Because while they were busy performing status and clinging to perception, I had begun building something real, something quiet, deliberate, and irreversible. They had taken me for granted. Now they would learn what it meant to lose a foundation they never even acknowledged. And I wasn't done yet. Revenge, when executed properly, does not arrive with sirens or dramatic confrontations. It does not scream. It does not slam doors. It does not even whisper. True revenge is structural. It is felt, not seen. It reshapes the very architecture of someone's life until the ground beneath them cracks, and they are forced to reckon with a reality they never thought could shift. And that was exactly what I set in motion. The gala went forward without me, and I allowed it. I watched from afar as they smiled in photos, held champagne flutes with manicured fingers, and accepted donations from people I once considered friends. I even recognized the dress Marissa wore. It was paid for using a bank transfer labeled graduation bonus. There was something poetic about watching her dance in a dress she never thanked me for, under chandeliers I helped restore, in a room whose legacy now bore my name etched into the foundation plaque, in honor of Maureen Whitmore, for her unmatched contribution to historical preservation. Her name wasn't on that wall. Neither was her mother's, or Dylan's, but mine was carved in brass. Still, that wasn't the revenge. The real work was already underway. I had spent the last 6 months quietly redirecting every bit of influence, resource, and financial legacy I had cultivated. The charitable trust, now officially named the Whitmore Initiative, began awarding educational grants and housing stipends to women over 60 who had been financially discarded by their families. My story was not theirs, but the bruises were familiar, and helping them felt clearer, more nourishing than anything I'd ever done. I expanded the initiative's board, bringing in thoughtful, razor-sharp women from across sectors. I gave speaking engagements. I funded historical art restorations and community centers. Invitations rolled in. I politely declined all except one, a documentary project on female philanthropists reshaping late-life legacy. Marissa's world was shrinking. Mine was expanding. The next ripple came from the estate attorney's office. Mark, who had finally checked the original trust statements after months of pretending nothing was wrong, discovered that the family home, my home, the place he once assumed would be his inheritance, was now in the name of the Charleston Preservation Trust. The house would be turned into a public historical landmark and museum. His call came the next morning, laced with disbelief and thinly veiled fury. "You gave the house away," he snapped. "Are you serious?" "I gave it back," I said evenly, "to the community that never laughed at me. This isn't what Dad wanted." I laughed softly. "Your father wanted a yacht and a secretary he didn't have to hide. Forgive me if I've stopped honoring his legacy." The line went dead. A week later, my financial advisor confirmed that Dylan had made a failed attempt to apply for a line of credit using one of the accounts previously associated with my name. A clerical error, they claimed, but we both knew better. The paper trail led back to a family dependent on illusions, and slowly I was shattering them. And yet, even as I reclaimed my power, I did not gloat. I did not send warnings or spiteful notes. That would have been too easy. I simply let the consequences roll in, slow and steady like an incoming tide. The final stone fell when the city announced the new Community Learning Center project, fully funded by the Whitmore Initiative. Local news outlets celebrated it. I gave a speech, brief but firm, beneath a banner bearing my name. And when I looked out into the crowd, I saw people who had never known me, clapping with genuine gratitude. They didn't care about my name card at a wedding. They cared that I showed up, that I meant something, that I mattered. Meanwhile, Marissa sent one last message. This time it wasn't angry. It wasn't cold. It was short.
Gran.
I don't know what happened to us. I didn't respond, because she knew. By the time the dust truly settled, there was no going back. The family structure I had once held aloft, through quiet sacrifice, financial support, and emotional cushioning, had collapsed under its own unacknowledged weight. And I had not lifted a single finger to stop it, because I was building something else. In the weeks that followed the gala and the public announcement of the Learning Center, the ripple effects began to spread through the tightly woven fabric of our social circle. Friends of friends, donors, old tennis partners, people began to ask questions, not about money but about legacy, about truth, about how a woman like me, long relegated to the background, had somehow emerged not only relevant but powerful. It was a slow but irreversible shift. At church, people I hadn't spoken to in years came up to me and said things like, "Maureen, I had no idea how involved you were in the preservation efforts. Your speech moved me. We need more women like you at the table." I smiled politely. I didn't gloat. I didn't bring up the wedding or the tag or the years of being ignored, because those things no longer define me. Their world, their small, curated, exclusive world was shrinking.
Mine was vast.
Mark for a while tried to salvage things. He invited me to lunch. He offered vague apologies, wrapped in platitudes about family and stress and misunderstanding. I listened, but I never let the conversation drift toward money or inheritance. He didn't ask, not directly, but his eyes said everything. He was trying to re-enter a life that no longer waited for him. Marissa, on the other hand, vanished completely. She unfollowed me on social media. She didn't send a Christmas card, or a New Year's message, or even the usual holiday photo of her and Dylan posed by their massive Christmas tree. I assumed they downsized, or were forced to. I didn't check. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was free. The day the first students arrived at the Whitmore Learning Center, I stood on the steps in a navy blue coat and matching gloves, watching the volunteers guide them inside. Some were single mothers. Some were adult women returning to school after divorce. Some were teenage girls with scars behind their eyes and determination in their posture. They didn't know me. They didn't know me. And yet, in their eyes, I saw more gratitude than my family had shown me in 20 years. Inside, one of the girls, barely 16, hair in a messy braid, boots scuffed at the toes, came up to me as I was walking down the hallway. "You the lady who started this?"
I smiled.
She tilted her head. "Why'd you do it?" I looked at her, really looked. At her bruised resolve, her forced calm, the same kind I'd seen in the mirror for years. "Because people like you," I said gently, "deserve more than silence." She nodded. That was all. And walked away. It was the greatest conversation I'd had all year. Later that evening back home, I opened the drawer where I had once kept every receipt, every transfer, every silent act of sacrifice. I took out the last remaining artifact, the wedding name card. I turned it over. It still read in loopy script, "The old lady who's paying for everything." But now I smiled at it, not with bitterness but with clarity. I placed it into the fireplace, watched it catch, watched it curl, blacken and vanish. And for the first time in a long, long while I felt light. Not because I had taken something from them, but because I had finally returned something to myself. Spring arrived slowly that year. The frost lingered longer than usual, clinging to the windows and flower beds as if reluctant to release its hold. But eventually the earth remembered itself. My roses began to push through the soil, timid at first, then bold. And I too emerged. The scandals surrounding the unpaid wedding bills had faded into whispers. The lawsuits were quietly settled. The social media posts dried up. Marissa stopped pretending, and I stopped wondering whether she ever would apologize. It didn't matter anymore. The Whitmore Learning Center opened its doors officially in April. That day, I wore a simple cream suit and a pair of earrings that had belonged to my grandmother. Nothing extravagant but intentional. As I walked through the halls, sunlight catching on polished tile, voices echoing through new classrooms, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Not as someone's grandmother. Not as someone's wallet. But as a woman who built something enduring. The media called it a philanthropic milestone. The mayor called me a community pillar. But the title that stuck with me most came from one of the volunteers, a young woman sorting library donations. She smiled and said, almost offhandedly, "You're the reason these women believe they matter." It hit me harder than anything my family had ever said. Because they never saw me as a reason, just a resource, a background fixture in their story. But now I was the author of my own. Mark wrote me a letter a month after the center opened. Not an email. A real letter. His handwriting hadn't changed since high school. Stiff and formal, like he was always afraid of spelling something wrong. He didn't apologize, not directly. But he wrote, "I never realized how much you did for all of us. I think maybe I didn't want to. I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately. I hope one day I build something worth your pride." I didn't cry when I read it. But I did sit quietly for a long time. I folded it neatly, placed it in my desk drawer and didn't respond. Some doors are better left unopened. Marissa remained silent. I heard through the grapevine that her marriage had begun to crack under the weight of image maintenance. She had returned to part-time work at an event planning agency and moved into a smaller townhouse with Dylan. People whispered, but I didn't listen. I had stopped defining myself by their noise. Instead, I poured myself into the center, the community, and the women whose lives now wove into mine. We hosted weekend mentorships, literacy workshops, housing advocacy summits. I began teaching a once-a-month seminar called Reclaiming Voice After Silence. The room was always full. One afternoon, while clearing the front garden of the center, I found a discarded name tag wedged under the bush near the gate. It must have belonged to one of the students. Crumpled, the marker faded, the adhesive worn. I picked it up gently, smoothed it out. No name on it. Just a blank space waiting. And I realized that's what I had done. I had reclaimed my name. Not from a tag or a card or a table, but from years of being spoken over, used up, and left invisible. Not anymore. The old lady wasn't paying for everything now. She was investing in herself. And for the first time in her long winding life, she was worth every damn cent. Thank you for listening to this story until the very end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to Betrayal and Revenge, give us a like, and hit the bell so you won't miss new tales. Share your thoughts in the comments. I value your feedback. See you in the next stories of Betrayal and Revenge.